Chapter 211. Pei Chi was a little shocked. She stared at him with her eyes wide open in disbelief. After a long while, she finally found her voice. Tang Yu, you didn't say that. I said, get married if you're pregnant. His tone was very firm. He lifted her up, lifted her chin, and forced her to look at him with a burning gaze. Pei Chi's entire body was trembling slightly. She pursed her lips and said after a long while, but I'm not pregnant. And she hadn't agreed to it either. Tang Yu's fingers tightened as he stared at her little face, not letting go of any expression on her face. After a long while, he said in a low voice, Do you want me to make you pregnant now? As he said that, he couldn't help but get excited. Pei Chi shifted her body uneasily, but he held her still again. You're not allowed to escape. Pei Chi was at a loss. She couldn't look into his burning eyes, so she lowered her eyes and said softly, Tang Yu, do you want to get married at 22 or get married now while you're pregnant? He kindly gave her a choice. He knew that he was being a little hasty, but he didn't want to wait any longer. There were too many unpredictable things that could happen while he waited for her to grow up. Thus, he decided to make her his, Tang Yu's, exclusive. Pei Chi looked at him eagerly. If she didn't choose to get married at 22, would he get her pregnant now? But she didn't dare to agree. Pei Chi hugged him shamelessly, not saying a word. A tinge of disappointment flashed through Tang Yu's heart, but he still forced himself to say, Looks like I have to choose for you. No. Her little hands wrapped around his neck, and she said in a low voice, Tang Yu, I need to think about it. He had already carried her and was walking towards the bedroom. Upon hearing that, he looked down at her and said hoarsely, Think about it carefully then. She gasped and sank into the bed with him. At this critical moment, her little hands scrambled to the bedside table and took out a small box. Her voice trembled as she said, Tang Yu, use this. He lowered his head and suddenly felt annoyed. He slapped the box away from her hand. Her little hands were suddenly grabbed and pinned to the two sides of the bed. His eyes stared at her, and the look in his eyes scared her. She couldn't help but close her eyes. Tang Yu bit her neck fiercely, as if he was venting his anger. He would only feel better when he saw her become a completely different person because of him. At the most intense moment, he buried his face in her neck and whispered, Pei Chi, do you love me? He had never felt so vulnerable when he asked. Tang Yu, such a high and mighty person, was begging a little girl for her love after a long time. He did not receive any response. When he looked up, Pei Chi had already fainted. Her face was flushed red. Tang Yu reached out and pulled her into his arms. He hugged her carefully and gently patted her back, but she didn't know how gentle he was. Tang Yu looked at her beautiful little face and smiled bitterly. If it was Jinrong or Chi, would you agree? The next morning, when Pei Chi woke up, Tang Yu was no longer in bed. She sat up and reached out to rub her messy hair. She felt a little hungry. She didn't seem to have eaten anything last night. She only remembered. Chapter 212. She paused for a moment and realized that he didn't want to talk about it anymore. She heaved a sigh of relief and said quickly, I have to go to school in the morning to settle the paperwork. I'll go to the company in the afternoon. Tang Yu looked at her and paused. Okay, I'll go to work first. He bent down and kissed her on the lips. Take care of yourself. Pei Chi looked at him and pursed her lips, not saying a word. Tang Yu smiled and reached out to stroke her hair. Call me after work. I'll pick you up. Pei Chi looked at him and suddenly felt a little sad. No matter what, she couldn't avoid it. She wanted to make use of Tang Yu. It was like a dying man clutching at the last straw of hope. Tang Yu went to the company. Xiao Ran reported his schedule for the day and went out. Then Meng Qingcheng came in. Tang Yu, I heard that Pei Chi has taken over the pay group. Tang Yu looked at him. You're very well informed. Meng Qingcheng smiled. Of course, I'm also concerned about Pei Chi. Tang Yu looked at him, and Meng Qingcheng immediately corrected himself. It's Pei Chi. Tang Yu looked down at the document and nodded. Meng Qingcheng didn't want to give up. He leaned over and said, Are you really willing to let her go to such a messy place? The business world was like a battlefield, and it wasn't a fun place. Moreover, Pei Chi was a young girl. With her looks, she would definitely be eaten alive. Tang Yu thought for a moment, put down the document in his hand, and looked at Meng Qingqing. Go to the media and let them know that I'm interested in marrying Pei Chi. Meng Qingqing was stunned and looked at Tang Yu. Are you serious? Tang Yu frowned. Since when did I like to joke around? Meng Qingqing hurriedly said yes, but he still didn't understand. Tang Yu, why would he fall for a girl like Pei Chi? His appearance was top-notch, but his background was also top-notch complicated. Still not going? Tang Yu glared at him, and Meng Qingqing hurriedly scampered out. When the door closed, Tang Yu let out a long sigh of relief. Just as Qingqing had said, how could he bear to part with her? But what could he do even if he couldn't bear to part with her? That girl was extremely stubborn. If he didn't let her do it, their relationship would probably return to the freezing point. Tang Yu felt that he was patient and tolerant to her, but he didn't know if she could understand. When Xiao Ran came in, she saw that the president was a little upset. She walked over and placed a stack of documents in front of him. President, there's a meeting to be held in a while. Tang Yu looked up at her and said, Xiao Ran, go and gather some information about the pay group for me. Xiao Ran had a rough idea of what to do. He nodded and said, I'll get it done right away. Tang Yu got up and left for the meeting. When he came back, there was a thick stack of documents in front of him. It was all about the pay group. He sat down and read it quietly. The more he read, the deeper his frown became. He remembered that a month ago, things weren't this bad. But now, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that the pay group was besieged on all sides. A company like this was handed over to Pei Chi. This wasn't doting. It was clearly a burden. Tang Yu was a little annoyed. He was annoyed with Pei Mingyi. After a long while, he made a call to the marketing department. Manager Liang, if there's any suitable business in the near future, and the amount isn't large, within 100 million, please keep it for me. Tang Yu didn't want to throw money at Pei Chi. That wasn't what she wanted. He could only help her secretly. Chapter 213. Pei Chi went to the school to apply for a leave of absence. Principal Wang felt it was a pity that such a diamond from South Africa was going to disappear from the school. He tried to persuade her to stay. Chi, this degree will always be reserved for you. You can come whenever you want, but it's better if it's early. After all, Pei Chi understood what Principal Wang meant. She pursed her lips and agreed in a low voice. When she walked out, she saw Lin Jinrong standing at the end of the long Kapok Avenue. He looked at her from afar and didn't approach her. He just stared at her like that. Pei Chi didn't move forward either. Too many things had happened in these few months. When she saw him again, it felt like a lifetime had passed. After a long time, Lin Jinrong disappeared. Pei Chi looked at him, tears welling up in her eyes. Next to her stood Chen Xinjie. Pei Chi, if I were you, I would choose to rely on a man. Chen Xinjie tilted her head and looked at Pei Chi. You know you're stupid. Do you think you can support a company? Don't be ridiculous. In the end, you'll still be crying in Tang Yu's arms. Tang Yu will still be the one to clean up the mess. Pei Chi looked ahead and listened to her words. After a long time, she turned her head and looked at Chen Xinjie. They hadn't seen each other for a long time. Chen Xinjie was different from before. In the past, Chen Xinjie didn't pay much attention to her appearance. Now, she was dressed up nicely. Pei Chi looked at her and smiled. What does that have to do with you? Chen Xinjie was stunned. Then, she said unhappily, Tang Yu will never marry you. Just thinking about you and Lin Jinrong is enough to make him feel bad. Pei Chi didn't say anything and walked straight ahead. She didn't care about these people. She only cared about Pei Mingyi and that person. But that person was someone she couldn't afford to care about. With every step Pei Chi took, she felt like she was walking on the edge of fate's blade. She didn't know if she was a joke like Chen Xinjie said, but she wouldn't beg Tang Yu to help her. She would feel guilty. When she arrived at the pay group, she still had a headache looking at the documents that were particularly unfamiliar to her. The company was also a bit messy. Zhou Meilin never gave up and incited some of her old subordinates to make things difficult for Pei Chi. Secretary Xiao Wen had actually blocked some, but she couldn't block all of them. During the meeting, Pei Chi was described as having a hard time. She didn't understand it at all. She walked out of the conference room. Although it was late autumn, her back was already drenched in cold sweat. The financial crisis of the Pei Corporation. A few major shareholders requested to withdraw their shares, and some orders were also canceled by the buyers. Pei Chi couldn't solve these problems. Holding onto a thick stack of documents, Xiaowen looked at Pei Chi with a hint of sympathy in her eyes. Boss Pei must be having a headache. It's not easy for a young lady. However, she would rather follow Pei Chi than follow an old witch like Zhou Meilin. At most, she would just have to find a new job if the company collapsed. This was what Xiaowen secretly thought in her heart. Pei Chi sat in her office with a financial report in her hand. The Pei Corporation didn't have enough startup capital, not even 1 million yuan. On the days when Pei Mingyi passed away, Zhou Meilin used all kinds of excuses to empty the company again. Chapter 214. Boss Pei. If those shareholders want to withdraw their shares, the company would not be able to fork out that much money. If things get out of hand, things would get out of hand, Little One said worriedly. Pei Chi knew in her heart that this was all Zhou Meilin's ploy to make things difficult for her and make her give up on the company. Little One, let me think about it. Pei Chi smiled faintly and looked at the report again. Little One pursed her lips. All right then, Boss Pei. I'll head out first. Let me know if you need anything. Xiaowen walked out. Pei Chi stayed until 10 at night before returning. When she returned, she even carried a stack of documents. Tang Yu did not return home either. She opened the door and heaved a sigh of relief. She put down the things and ate something casually before starting to look at those documents again. Her mind was filled with nothing but money. Pei Chi didn't expect that one day she would become so unscrupulous and realistic. Suddenly, she thought of King Entertainment. Perhaps she could, but when she thought of Tang Yu, Pei Chi hesitated for a moment. However, she made up her mind. Tang Yu had not returned when she went to bed. It was already 1 p.m. Tang Yu only returned after 2 p.m. Slightly tipsy, he did not take a shower immediately. Instead, he reached out to touch her on the bed. Chi had lost a lot of weight recently. He really could not bear to part with her. However, what could he do? This little girl was extremely stubborn in his heart. He hoped that she would continue to study so that they could get married after she graduated. His fingers gently touched her little face. He smiled helplessly and walked into the bathroom to take a shower. When he came out, he was already refreshed. Looking at the shadow under her eyes, he could not bear to touch her. However, that did not include daybreak. When Pei Chi woke up, she saw Tang Yu's magnified, handsome face. He had slept late, but did not look tired at all. He was still extremely handsome. She had just opened her eyes when she was kissed. Then, her pajamas were lifted up. Her little hand caught his big palm. Tang Yu. Morning's voice was still a little hoarse. Tang Yu didn't stop. He pressed her down and pressed his lips against her neck. What time did you come back last night? His voice was warm, and he was occupying her. Pei Chi couldn't take it anymore. She raised her head and said, 10 o'clock. He paused for a moment and then stopped. He hovered above her and looked at her intently. After a long time, he said softly, Chi, I'll get the driver to pick you up every day, okay? You can't refuse. He whispered in her ear domineeringly. Pei Chi looked up at him. I'm worried. His fingers gently touched her little face, and then he did not let go of her. However, he was worried that both of them would have to go to work soon, so he decided to end this quickly, even if he was not satisfied. After breakfast, Tang Yu sent her to the office. When they got out of the car, Tang Yu suddenly held her little hand and handed her a check. The amount wasn't too big, just 20 million. It was just enough to solve the Pei Group's urgent need. He placed the check in her little hand. Chi, this is not a transaction. Pei Chi looked at him and pursed her lips into a straight line. She pinched the check and put it back in the cabinet. I don't need it now. I'll get it from you when I need it. Chapter 215. Pei Chi opened the car door and alighted. She had just entered the office when Little One told her a piece of good news. The business department received an order for about 80 million yuan this morning. According to the contract, we can earn more than 10 million yuan. Although it's not a big order, it's really good for now. Let me see. Pei Chi immediately reached out. Little One handed the document to her and pointed at it. It's a new product from Jiame Company, and we can pre-order the goods twice. This product is very popular now, and we don't have to worry about selling it. Many cell phone and electronic manufacturers are fighting for it. Little One thought for a moment and said, the shipment will be very fast. Boss Pei, this is a very good opportunity to build a good relationship with Jiame Company. It will bring us many opportunities in the future. She actually wanted to say something, but she swallowed her words. Obviously, Boss Pei did not know that Jiame was a subsidiary of Xingyuan, and Little One cleverly decided not to tell her. Pei Chichi looked at it for a long time before looking up at Little One. Is this reliable? Little One blinked. I think Jiame has a good reputation, but if Boss Pei is not assured, you can go back and ask someone to take a look. She did not say who this person was. In any case, Boss Pei would know even if she did not say it. Pei Chichi indeed understood. She closed the document. Then I will think of a way to get the startup funds. Little One muttered in her heart. What else could she do? She just had to say something to Tang Yu. Pei Chichi looked at her. What's my schedule in the afternoon? There's only one meeting in the afternoon, but it's not too important, Little One said immediately. Pei Chichi thought for a moment. I'll go out in the afternoon. I won't be returning to the office. At King Entertainment, Qin Amlin sat in his office, holding a glass of red wine in his hand. The entire office was decorated in an artistic style. The colors were thick but dark. There was a knock on the door, and then his secretary entered. President Qin, a lady wants to see you. Every day, there were many women who wanted to see President Qin, but she never informed them. Today, it was because the girl who came was too beautiful and didn't look like those women who pestered her. Qin Amlin put down the cup in his hand with an inscrutable expression on his face. That little mouse had finally arrived. The secretary was a little surprised. They let him in without asking. However, she still left immediately. After a while, she came back with Pei Chichi. President Qin, I'll get you a cup of coffee. Qin Amlin nodded. After the door was closed, his eyes fell on Pei Chichi's face. Have you made up your mind? As he spoke, he picked up a pack of cigarettes from the table and lit one up. He slowly took a puff and looked at her. Pei Chichi stood and said, I want to know what kind of advertisement and how much is it paid. Qin Amlin smiled, and the corners of his mouth curled up. For a newcomer, it's usually only about 500,000 yuan. But if there's a nude scene, it'll be 1 million. I want 20 million. Pei Chichi was expressionless. Qin Amlin's fingers, which were holding the cigarette, but trembled. Then he paused and looked up at her. His expression seemed to think that she had gone crazy. Even an A-list international movie queen might not have such a price. Chapter 216. Qin Amlin leaned back against the back of the leather chair. He re-examined the young girl in front of him. There was a rare perseverance in her eyes. It seems that you really need money. He put out the cigarette. Why don't you ask Tang Yu for it? You're actually spending Tang Yu's money in this way. Pei Chichi looked down and her long eyelashes fluttered. After a long while, she chuckled and said, maybe it's for peace of mind. Qin Amlin's expression changed slightly. He stared at that small face that could topple cities, and only then did he spit out one sentence at a time. You've fallen in love with him, haven't you? Pei Chichi looked up. He thought he would see panic or embarrassment in her eyes, but she didn't. She just smiled and said, President Qin, I can tell you the answer if you sign the contract with me. What if I don't want to know? Qin Amlin sneered and reached out to pinch her chin. It was probably a habit because he always treated the women around him like this, except, of course, Xin Lian. Pei Chichi dodged. Qin Amlin retracted his hand and looked at the girl in front of him quietly. He seemed to understand why Tang Yu was interested in her. She was indeed a difficult girl to deal with. After a long time, he smiled and said, okay. He opened the drawer and took out a contract and handed it to her. Take a look. If there's no problem, you can sign it. The advance payment is 50%. Pei Chichi took a look and saw that it was an international skincare brand. It was a very famous brand, and the representative company in Asia-Pacific was Jean Taiho of the Shin family. She looked up at Qin Amlin and asked, I want to ask, do you need the do? Qin Amlin smiled and said, this is an international brand. For the sake of their own image, they won't have too much do. Pei Chichi knew in her heart that there wouldn't be too much, but there would still be some. As for the purpose, Pei Chi was also clear. If such a commercial was filmed and there were nude scenes, Tang Yu would probably skin her alive. At this moment, she hesitated, but only for a few seconds. After reading the contract carefully and confirming that there were no problems, she signed her name on it. The liquidated damages are 200 million. Qin Amlin pressed down the pages and gave her one last chance. Pei Chi lowered her head. I know, but I also have a condition. He slowly raised his eyes. The scale requires my approval. Add this to the list. Otherwise, I'll tear it up right now. Qin Amlin smiled slowly. Of course you can. King is a legitimate company. We won't do anything that goes against the contract for personal reasons. Pei Chi let go. Qin Amlin took out his checkbook and wrote a check for 10 million. He said mildly, the shoot will take about 2 days next week. There's no need for outdoor scenes. It'll all be done in the studio. Of course, the person in charge of Jean Taihe will also come. He paused. You know her, Shen Lian. Is that okay? Pei Chi only pursed her lips and didn't say anything. Qin Amlin's gaze deepened. Are you like this when you're with Tang Yu? You don't please him? Tang Yu is a difficult person to please. Qin Amlin knew this all too well. Chapter 217. Pei Chi was stunned for a moment. He doesn't like people trying to please him. Usually, he was the one who made her happy. Even in bed, it seemed that way. Although Pei Chi had only said a short sentence, the amount of information was too much. Even Qin Amlin choked on the smoke. He choked for a long time. He looked up at Pei Chi. Pei Chi had already taken the check and left. He didn't know why, but he thought that perhaps one day, the little girl that Tang Yu doted on 1,000 times would also leave Tang Yu in the end. The door closed. Shen Lian walked out of the lounge. She looked at Qin Amlin and asked, You signed it? Qin Amlin didn't say a word. He just threw the contract in his hand at her. Shen Lian held the contract and sneered. I overestimated her. She's no different from those gold-digging women. She's willing to strip for 20 million. Qin Amlin leaned back in his chair. His long legs were on the edge of his desk. He took a deep drag of his cigarette and looked at Shen Lian. If she strips in front of Tang Yu, I think Tang Yu would be willing to give her 1 billion for one night. Shen Lian was a little annoyed. Qin Amlin, he wasn't moved. He held the contract and said, Shen Lian, this is King Entertainment. I'm in charge of the artists I sign. She won't break the rules. Because Pei Chi was someone he had his eyes on. She was a pearl that he had his eyes on. Given time, she would definitely shine brightly. He wouldn't allow her to have any scandals. Shen Lian was stunned. She had thought that Qin Amlin was trying so hard to sign Pei Chi because of her. But now, it was obvious that wasn't the case. Amlin, give her to me. Shen Lian's hands were placed on the desk opposite him. She was wearing a suit, and as she bent down, he could see everything clearly. Qin Amlin looked at her quietly. He knew that she was seducing him. She had used this trick a few years ago. Qin Amlin sat there without batting an eyelid, allowing her to unbutton his shirt. When she sat in his arms and tried to kiss his chin, Qin Amlin held her sharp chin and said coldly, I'm not drunk now, and I'm not Tang Yu. With that, he pushed her away, straightened his clothes, and turned around to look at Shen Lian, who was in a sorry state. Did you know? There are several types of women. One is what I want, one is what I hate, and one is a commodity. Right now, to him, Pei Chi was a commodity, and a top-notch commodity at that. Shen Lian was the kind of woman that he wanted and hated at the same time. His body wanted her, but his heart rejected her, and even hated her. A woman who had someone else in her heart would offer her body for that man. To him, it was an insult. Amlin, you don't want me? Shen Lian's arms were around his neck, and her body was close to his. Her voice was soft and charming. She was really beautiful, the kind of cold beauty, the kind that gave people a sense of coldness. Qin Amlin looked at her, with one hand holding her waist and the other pressing the intercom. His voice was cold and ruthless. Jessica, call all the newcomers to my office to audition. Shen Lian was stunned. Qin Amlin, you'd rather have them than me? Shen Lian gritted her teeth. He grunted and still held her. Do you want to put on your clothes first? It's very air-conditioned here. Chapter 218. The newcomer was very young, very beautiful, and most importantly, obedient and tactful. Knowing that she was here for an audition, she walked over obediently and started kissing Cheen Amlin. Jessica tactfully went out. He was the manager of a group of newcomers. Cheen Amlin carried the girl called Xiaoyan onto his desk. As he kissed her, he pulled down her zipper without a care for Shun Lian's presence. Shun Lian just stood there, feeling indescribably embarrassed. At that moment, it was as if she had returned to the past. She wanted Tang Yu, but Tang Yu couldn't touch her. Now, Cheen Amlin was touching someone else in front of her. Cheen Amlin, are you crazy? Shun Lian had always been proud. She had never imagined that one day, Cheen Amlin would treat her like this. Didn't he love her very much? So much that he would do anything for her? Cheen Amlin looked up from the woman's embrace. His gaze was a little cold. You think that just because I slept with you once, I have to listen to you? Shun Lian, you've underestimated me and overestimated yourself. He had asked for that girl called Xiaoyan right in front of her. That girl was very sensible. At first, she had come for him, but later, she had taken the initiative to serve Cheen Amlin. The scene was explosive. Shun Lian just stood there. She wrapped her jacket tightly around herself, unwilling to watch or listen, but those voices kept drilling into her ears. She couldn't hide even if she wanted to. Half an hour later, Cheen Amlin zipped up his own zipper. He was already neat and tidy. He patted Xiaoyan and wrote her a check. Xiaoyan was also sensible. She took the check and walked out. Serving President Cheen once was an open secret in King, but this was only known within the small circle of King Entertainment. However, this kind of thing was only known within the small circle of King Entertainment. Outside, no one would know, much less dare to say a word about it. Moreover, Cheen Amlin had a habit. When a small star became a hot star, he would not touch it anymore. The people he had met were all rookies. So in King, it was called an audition, but it was just an audition in bed. After the girl left, Cheen Amlin looked at Shun Lian and straightened his tie calmly. Did you see that? To me, women are just a passageway, and you are just a little more expensive. He had directly pierced through her beautiful dream and made her no longer think that Cheen Amlin was still the man who would let her do whatever she wanted and silently guard behind her. He took out a cigarette and lit it. His voice was a little hoarse. Shun Lian, actually after we did it that time, we could have been very happy. But you and I, neither of us is the other's salvation. Never. Not in the past. Not in the future. What about Pei Chi? Are you going to touch her? Ever since she was young, Shun Lian had only cried for Tang Yu. She was as proud as a little princess. But today Cheen Amlin had done it. He had smashed her pride and dignity to the ground and stomped on it. Cheen Amlin laughed. He looked at her with a cold gaze. I've said it before. She is an expensive commodity, and I will never touch Tang Yu's woman again. But Cheen Amlin had never thought that one day he would fall in love with his commodity. He loved her so much that he was willing to give up everything for her. Bastard! Shun Lian glared at him and finally walked out. Chapter 219. After a long time, he picked up Pei Chi's contract and made a call to Jessica. Spread the word that King has found the most suitable candidate for this season's advertisement. It's a newcomer. I want to be on the headlines for 3 days in a row. Jessica was a little worried. President Cheen, wouldn't that be too much exposure? It's not good for an artist's development. Let's do that. Cheen Amlin had already made up his mind and hung up. It was already evening when Pei Chi walked out of King's building. She went to the bank and transferred the money to the Pei Corporation's account. Because of Jia Mei's order and the transfer of a sum of money, the shareholders who wanted to withdraw their shares had renewed hope and started to doubt Zhou Meilin's words. After all, Boss Pei was backed by Tang Yu, the CEO of Xingyuan. He could save the Pei Corporation with just a piece of skin. Should they wait and see? Pei Chi called for a meeting to temporarily appease them. Little one said as she walked out of the conference room, Boss Pei is getting more and more into the situation. Those two people have been in the company for many years. They are not good people. They are in cahoots with Zhou Meilin. They must have realized that Boss Pei has the ability to revive the company. That's why they relented. Pei Chi walked into her office and slumped against the back of her chair. She swayed gently and laughed bitterly. How can it be that easy? Little Wen, I'm very tired after these few days. Little Wen's voice became gentler. You have to rest well. Don't force yourself. I don't want to, but Zhou Meilin has been forcing me. If I make any mistakes, she will incite the shareholders to sell their shares. She picked up a pen and drew on a piece of paper. Little Wen, sort out the company's accounts for the past year and give them to me. Little Wen understood what she meant the moment she heard that. She could not help but be stunned. She looked at Pei Chi hesitantly. After all, she did not finish her sentence, but Pei Chi understood. Do as I say. Pei Chi's pen paused, and she scratched hard on the paper. Zhou Meilin had sold her out and angered her father. She had transferred a large amount of money from the company behind her father's back. Wasn't it reasonable for her to go to jail? Little Wen's gaze deepened. Perhaps she had underestimated Boss Pei previously. Boss Pei was nothing like a 20-year-old girl. When it was necessary, she would be more ruthless than anyone else. After she left, Pei Chi sat in her office for a long time before she was ready to go back. The chauffeur was already waiting for her downstairs. It was a black Audi. Tang Yu had yet to return home after arriving at Xia City. Tang Yu did not go home, even though he had returned. Pei Chi vaguely felt his emotions in her heart, but she did not delve into it. She walked into the bathroom and took a shower. When she came out, she was a little annoyed. Pei Chi could vaguely feel his emotions. However, she did not dwell on it. She walked into the bathroom and took a shower. When she came out, she felt vexed. That kind of hatred seeped into her bones. She wished that she could send Zhou Meilin to jail until she died of old age. Pei Chi's gaze landed on the cigarette box that Tang Yu had placed on the table. She looked at it for a long time. Then, she walked over and picked up the cigarette box and lighter. She sat on the toilet and imitated him. She picked up a cigarette and lit it with the lighter. She just looked at it. Then, she carefully brought it closer to her mouth and took a puff. She choked and coughed so hard that tears almost rolled down her cheeks. Chapter 220. Tang Yu looked at his little pet in shock. She was smoking, and she was smoking his cigarette. As she coughed, she brought the cigarette closer to her mouth. That intoxicated expression made him want to give her a good spanking. With that thought in mind, he did it. Pei Chi was shocked. She raised her eyes, and there was still a trace of moisture in her eyes as she stared at him. You've grown up? You smoked? Tang Yu undid his tie and stepped into the bathroom, closing the door behind him. Pei Chi sat there, not daring to move an inch. She was still holding the pitiful cigarette in her hand. The cigarette indicated that it was innocent. Tang Yu sat on the edge of the bathtub opposite her. His long legs were stretched out comfortably, almost reaching her feet. His dark eyes were locked on her eyes, not letting go of any expression on her face. She was stunned for a long time. Suddenly, she pressed the cigarette but into the ashtray. She looked at him pitifully. There was no more. Tang Yu smiled faintly and took the cigarette box. He lit one and took a puff. Do you want to smoke? Pei Chi did not say a word. She just looked at the red cigarette, but her gaze was pure and somewhat sexy, innocent and seductive. He held the cigarette in his hand and looked at her with a hint of encouragement in his dark eyes. So sinister. She mustered up her courage and got up. She half knelt in front of him and moved closer to him. Her long black hair was scattered behind her. She was only wearing a white silk pajamas with a loose strap. As she was half kneeling, he could even see the side of her body. His eyes were dark as he looked at her attentively. The Pei Chi at this moment was poisonous, the ultimate killer of men. No man could remain indifferent when looking at her like this, unless he was a eunuch. She finally moved closer to him and took a puff of the cigarette. This time, she did not choke on it. Tang Yu looked at her and narrowed his eyes. Very easy to draw, isn't it? Tang Yu sneered. By the time Pei Chi was alerted, it was already too late. He quickly put the cigarette but on his lips, grabbed her wrist with one hand, and pulled off his tie with the other. He quickly tied her hands behind her back. This posture was extremely enchanting, as if she was offering herself to him. He looked down at her. Just stay here and reflect on yourself. As he spoke, he took off his clothes and went to take a shower, leaving Pei Chi by the side of the toilet. Tang Yu. It was very uncomfortable for her to be tied up like this. And what was even more hateful was that he made her kneel there. That would be too embarrassing, and my knee would hurt. She called out to him for a long time, but he ignored her and continued to take his bath. When Tang Yu came out, Pei Chi stopped screaming. She was half kneeling and half sitting on the ground. Her forehead was covered with a thin layer of sweat, and her thin pajamas were stuck to her body because of the sweat. How dare you smoke? This punishment was considered light. When she saw him coming out, she meowed like a kitten. Tang Yu. Her voice was dry and full of pitiful energy. Tang Yu looked at her and sneered. Do you know that you're wrong? She nodded her head vigorously, and her voice was still like that of a kitten. Can you let me go? Tang Yu walked over, picked her up, and untied her. Go take a shower. You stink. Chapter 2:21. She returned to the bedroom. The lights were a little dim, and Tang Yu was leaning against the headboard, his gaze deep. Pei Chi's heart skipped a beat. She pulled her bathrobe, carefully lifted the blanket, and laid down beside him. Tang Yu tilted his head to look at her. Her little body had burrowed under the blanket and was wriggling slowly like a caterpillar. He did not move, but quietly took out a cigarette from the bedside and lit it. But the next second, the cigarette in his hand almost burned him. Damn it. That little rascal. She actually knew. He had never thought that Pei Chi would take the initiative to do such a thing for him. Although he had forced her that time, forcing and loving each other were two different feelings. She had hurt him, but that kind of pain was different from normal pain. He let out a muffled groan in embarrassment, unable to restrain himself. He pulled her long hair, pulled her out from under the blanket, and kissed her. Pei Chi, you've become naughty. She obediently let him kiss her and let him take off her pajamas after a passionate kiss. She lay in his arms. Tang Yu placed one hand on her back to comfort her. He held a cigarette in his other hand and smoked slowly. Recently, he had gotten into the habit of smoking after bed. After smoking the cigarette, he prepared to take a shower and sleep. Pei Chi half propped herself up and looked at the cigarette in his hand. Tang Yu looked at her. You want to smoke? She did not speak and only looked at him. That kind of gaze. He couldn't wait to kill her again. Tang Yu placed the cigarette in front of her mouth. Just once. Pei Chi held the cigarette and took 2 careful puffs. She did not dare to smoke anymore. Tang Yu took the cigarette and extinguished it in a practiced and elegant manner. Then he carried her to the bathroom. She was kissed. Chi, you've enjoyed it. Now it's my turn. So, the cigarette was not for nothing. That night, he did it particularly incisively and vividly, almost beastifying himself. When Pei Chi went to work the next day, her entire body was still sore. She was a little sleepy, so she got Xiao Wen to make 2 cups of coffee. Just as she was looking at the accounts that Xiao Wen sent over, the door was pushed open with a bang. Xiao Wen followed behind and wanted to enter, but Zhou Meilin had already closed the door and locked it. Pei Chi looked up at Zhou Meilin. What are you doing here? Zhou Meilin looked thinner, and her face was a little yellow. Compared to before, her spirit was a lot worse. She glared at Pei Chi, her eyeballs almost popping out. Pei Chi, what are you trying to do? Do you want to sue me for company matters? Pei Chi wasn't surprised that she knew that Little One had transferred the bills from the accounts department. What surprised her was that Zhou Meilin had come over so quickly. She was still sitting there with a calm expression. Annie, it's good that you know it. You and I both know why the Pei family ended up like this. She picked up the accounts in her hands. These are enough to sue you until you die of old age in prison. Zhou Meilin lunged forward, snatched the papers, and tore them into pieces. Dream on. The company belongs to your father. If he dies, it will be mine. I've touched my own money. What can you do to me? Pei Chi, you're a bastard. I should have strangled you to death back then. Chapter 2:22. Zhou Meilin glared at her, wishing she could tear her apart. Pei Chi lifted her chin slightly. Annie, Do you know what's the stupidest thing about you? Zhou Meilin remained silent. When you were with that pretty boy, Rong Lei, did you believe that he would love you? Annie, don't you have a mirror at home? Do you think anyone would love you with that face of yours? Pei Chi sneered at Zhou Meilin. Dad is good to you, but you turn a blind eye to it. Instead, you trust a man who lives off a woman. Yes, Pei Mingyi might have been obsessed with Zhao Ku, but if he didn't care about Zhou Meilin, he wouldn't have tolerated her for so many years, and he wouldn't have indulged her again and again. But Zhou Meilin had never looked at it seriously. Zhou Meilin paused for a moment before regaining her composure. Don't give me that. Pei Chi, don't think that you can do anything with the Pei Corporation. Don't think that you can marry into the Tang family. I know. Pei Chi sneered and stared into her eyes. Zhao Ku, right? Annie, do you think I don't know? Zhou Meilin's heart trembled. This damned girl actually knew? It's not up to me whether I can get married or not. But it's up to me whether I can go to jail or not. Bitch, I'll strangle you to death. Zhou Meilin's sharp voice rang out as she pounced towards Pei Chi. At this moment, Shaowen had already asked someone from the security office to rush over and pull Zhou Meilin away with all her might. Zhou Meilin was held up like a madwoman. Her head was full of sweat, and her hair stuck to her forehead. She was in a sorry state. A trace of blood appeared on Pei Chi's neck. She stood up straight and pursed her lips as she looked at Zhou Meilin. She sneered and said to the security guard beside her, "Take the video and hand it over to the police station. Let her stay in there for a few days." This was also to let the shareholders know what would happen if they followed a mad dog. Little Wen's heart skipped a beat as she looked at Pei Chi. How was this the little girl she had seen in the beginning? The hatred in her eyes was enough to burn 10 Zhou Meilins. Zhou Meilin was still screaming, but no matter how much she screamed, there was no way she could stop fate. After everything calmed down, Little Wen's voice was very soft. "Boss Pei, the meeting is about to begin." Pei Chi nodded and stood up. Little Wen followed behind. No matter how she looked at it, she felt that Boss Pei was no longer the 20-year-old girl from back then. During the meeting, Pei Chi calmly introduced the middle-aged man to the shareholders and senior management. "This is Lawyer Deng, the new chief lawyer of the Pei Corporation. Zhou Meilin has been using the trust of the former boss Pei to steal a large amount of cash from the company for the past year. She has filed a complaint against us. I hope that the accounting department will cooperate." Of course, you can choose not to cooperate. Among the whispers below, Zhou Meilin has been arrested. Pei Chi's face was expressionless. She is suspected of assault. Manager Li of the accounting department wiped his sweat, but he remained silent. His heart was as clear as a mirror. Pei Chi's words were obviously directed at him. She wanted him to be her witness. However, how could he believe her? He had watched this young lady coldly for the past few days. In just half a month, he could tell that she was vicious and merciless. Her style was completely different from Pei Mingyi's. If he testified against Zhou Meilin today, he did not know if he would have to wait for death like Zhou Meilin tomorrow. Thus, Manager Li was still observing. What's more, he knew in his heart that without his evidence, there would not be any results in this lawsuit. Chapter 223. Before Pei Chi could get off work, Pei Huan rushed over with Xiao when following behind her. She could no longer work as a secretary. She was attacked twice in a day. Pei Huan's belly could already be seen. She held her belly with one hand and walked to Pei Chi. She raised her hand and was about to slap her. One of his hands grabbed hers and pulled it back forcefully, raising it high in the air. Pei Huan was a little stunned. She stared at Pei Chi's face. "Pei Huan, do you think I'm still that bastard that you can hit whenever you want?" Pei Chi sneered and threw her hand away. "Or do you want to go to the police station to reunite with Annie?" Pei Huan stared at her eyes. "Pei Chi, you're so vicious." Pei Chi chuckled. "Compared to you and your mother, I don't think I'm even 1/10 as good as you." Pei Huan pursed her lips. Her eyes were a little timid. After a long while, she said, "Dad passed away on his own. My mom didn't mistreat him." Pei Chi walked back to her desk. "Yes, Annie didn't do anything to Dad. She just sold me and told Dad about it." She looked at Pei Huan's angry face and suddenly smiled. Aren't you curious why I could get the Pei group so easily? Didn't Annie tell you the reason? Pei Chi-Chi's expression was a little evil. At this moment, Pei Huan was like a little lamb in front of her. Pei Huan didn't say anything, but her breathing was a little messy and her face was a little red. Because your good mother raised a gigolo? Pei Chi-Chi told her very kindly. You're lying. Pei Huan's voice was a little harsh. Her body was also trembling. She didn't believe it. She didn't believe it. How could Mom betray Dad? This was impossible. You can ask Annie yourself if she did. But now, Pei Huan, if I were you, I would take good care of my belly. After all, without this child, you really have nothing. Pei Chi-Chi sneered. As for Annie, I really want some peace and quiet for a few days. I can only invite her to stay there for a few days. Pei Huan glared at her. Pei Chi-Chi, my mom was right. You're an ingrate. Dogs that bite usually don't bark. Little one, who was at the side, wanted to say something. How could this person scold people like that? Pei Chi-Chi raised her hand to stop Xiaowen. She stood up and was one table away from Pei Huan. Her voice was very soft. So, I want to thank Annie for raising this dog. I will repay her for raising me. Pei Huan's heart was trembling. Such a Pei Chi-Chi had far exceeded her expectations. No, she was not Pei Chi-Chi. She was a demon, a blackened demon. Scram! Before I call security, I can't guarantee that they won't be as tactful as me. Pei Chi-Chi slowly sat down. Pei Huan was so angry that her lips were trembling. Pei Chi-Chi, you'll regret it. One day, I'll return everything you've done to me to you. No, double it. Let's encourage each other. Pei Chi-Chi curled her lips. Xiaowen, send Mrs. Lin out. Be careful. She's pregnant with a dragon seed. It won't be good if she relies on you. Xiaowen came over to invite Pei Huan. Pei Huan's lips trembled for a long time without moving. Finally, Pei Huan left, bringing with her a monstrous hatred. Xiaowen looked at Pei Chi-Chi. At that moment, she saw boundless loneliness in Pei Chi-Chi. That was the loneliness of carrying too many things. Chapter 224. Pei Chi-Chi called out to Xiaowen as she retreated. Xiaowen, with the evidence we have now, we can't sue Zhou Meilin. I was just trying to scare her. Pei Chi-Chi smiled gently. Dad isn't here, and we don't have any witnesses. Even if Dad was here, he would probably let her off for the sake of our marriage. Xiaowen did not say anything. At a time like this, it was best not to say anything. Sort out Jimmei's order. That's our only hope now. Pei Chi-Chi stood up. From tomorrow onwards, I won't be coming to the office for 3 days. Call me if you need anything. Xiaowen nodded. When Pei Chi-Chi arrived at the studio early in the morning, she was surprised to see that the makeup artist was Ning Jie. She was the one who styled Pei Huan at her wedding. Miss Pei. Ning Jie was also surprised to see Pei Chi-Chi. She looked at her for a while before asking softly, How are you and Mr. Tang? Pei Chi-Chi nodded. We're fine. Mr. Tang is a sentimental person. Ning Jie hinted. Mr. Tang doesn't know, right? Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips and did not say anything. What else did Ning Jie not know? The young lady had come here secretly. Ning Jie had been in this industry for a long time, and she was good at reading people's minds. It had only been a few months since she last saw Pei Chi-Chi, but she felt that she saw something different about her. Ning Jie did not say much. Try on the makeup. Pei Chi-Chi acknowledged and sat down. Ning Jie began to do her makeup. An hour later, Pei Chi-Chi couldn't help but ask, Isn't it a little too thick? You'll look good on camera. Trust me, this is already considered light makeup. Ning Jie smiled. Don't look at the beauties on TV or in movies. Their faces are actually covered with a thick layer of makeup. Pei Chi-Chi had the best foundation she had ever applied. After Ning Jie helped her with her foundation, she put on some color makeup. See, it's good to be young. Ning Jie looked at the information on the table beside her. For hair, the product requires straight black hair, so you don't need to touch it. It's fine as it is. He picked a white dress for Pei Chi-Chi. It was very pure, but it was a spaghetti style, so it had a touch of sexiness in its purity. The interior of the studio was a bathroom, and the theme of the commercial was lover. To put it bluntly, The female lead would rub skincare products on her body, and then let the male lead kiss it off bit by bit. Finally, they would kiss simple and crude. Pei Chi-Chi's gaze landed on the male lead's name. Wu Haoji, one of the most popular actors in the country. Many female celebrities wanted to work with him, not because he was famous, but because he was super handsome. Am I handsome? Pei Chi-Chi looked at the photo and secretly thought that Tang Yu was much more handsome than him. Just the thought of Wu Haoji kissing her from her feet all the way to her knees made her hair stand on end. Would Tang Yu kill her when it was broadcasted on television? He would. Pei Chi-Chi waited for a full 3 hours. It was already noon, but he still hadn't arrived. Wu Haoji was a big-shot celebrity, but he wasn't a part of King, so he was late. Let's audition first. Ning Jia was already used to situations like this, so she called out to the cameraman. Chapter 225. Pei Chi-Chi chuckled. I know, it's as long as his name. Just as she said that, a voice rang out from behind her. It was gentle and seductive. Is that so? Including certain places, it's the same length. That voice rang out right beside her ear, and a scorching breath blew behind her ear, one of the most sensitive areas of a woman. Pei Chi-Chi did not move. Her instincts told her that this was that very long. Wu Haoji. Slowly turning his head, he saw a very handsome man about 23 or 24 years old. He was young and successful, so the words "Little Heavenly King" were written on his face. Pei Chi-Chi did not say anything, but Wu Haoji was a little surprised. The reason why he was so late today was to express his dissatisfaction. This advertisement was an international brand, but someone of his status had to sleep with a newcomer. He had protested, but the higher-ups had completely ignored his opinion. All right, since they were ignoring him, he would just slack off. But he had not expected that the newcomer would be so beautiful. Seriously, he had seen all kinds of women in the entertainment industry. Half of the A-list and B-list actresses had slept with him, and there were many who were beautiful, but there were only a few who could be considered beautiful. And the girl in front of him was really the kind that only appeared once in 100 years. Wu Haoji was a little stunned. His eyes were fixed on Pei Chi-Chi's eyes. After a long time, he asked softly, "Do you want to measure it?" His hand held her fingers, hinting. Pei Chi-Chi had been following Tang Yu for a long time, and she actually understood what he meant. She did not retract her hand, but looked back at him and smiled faintly. I prefer official data. Wu Haoji stared at her for a long time, and then let go of her lazily. He did not force her. You will regret it. So many women wanted to sleep with him, but this woman rejected him directly. She must not have realized how handsome he was. Just then, Shen Lian walked in, followed by 2 secretaries, looking very imposing. Shen Lian's gaze landed on Pei Chi-Chi. In that instant, she was a little stunned, pure and seductive. Ji Yi's eyes were already glued to Pei Chi-Chi. Shen Lian slapped the document in Wu Hao's hand. Zi, have you never seen a woman before? Her tone revealed her closeness to Wu Haoji, as well as her contempt for Pei Chi-Chi. Pei Chi-Chi thought to herself that in Shen Lian's heart, people outside of her circle were all lowly creatures. She was also not interested in talking to Shen Lian. Pei Chi-Chi was not used to being treated coldly. After Shen Lian finished talking to the male lead, she seemed to have noticed Pei Chi-Chi and coughed. Who's this? Why don't you have any manners? Her assistant was in a difficult position. She looked at Pei Chi-Chi, hinting with her eyes that she should say something soft. Pei Chi-Chi lowered her head and tidied up her dress. She did not make a sound, as if she had not heard Shen Lian's words. Shen Lian's expression changed, and her voice became a little harsh. Pei Chi-Chi, did you hear what I said to you? The moment she said that, the surroundings fell silent. Pei Chi-Chi looked up at her and said very slowly, "Don't you know who I am?" Shen Lian looked as if she had been slapped in the face, and her expression became even uglier. Just as she was about to flare up, Wu Haoji reached out and held her shoulder. "That's enough, sister. Anger will make you age faster." Chapter 226. But Wu Haoji and Shun Lian's surnames were different, so they were relatives. Pei Chichi lowered her eyes and smiled faintly. She didn't really mind. Filming was originally supposed to start in the morning, but because the male lead was absent, it was delayed until the afternoon. When the director saw Pei Chichi, he was very satisfied and patiently guided her on how to show off her feminine beauty. Wu Haoji lazily leaned on the side and watched as Pei Chichi, who was wearing a white dress, slowly pulled up the hem of her dress. Her slender white fingers gently caressed that fair and tender skin. Her gaze was lowered and very focused at this moment. She was quiet and beautiful like a moving painting. Wu Haoji squinted his eyes as he watched her long hair spread across her shoulders and back. He had been in the industry for a few years and had become very popular. But he was actually quite impatient with women. Most of the female celebrities that he worked with wanted to create hype with him. Even a small advertisement would make it seem like they had slept together. Over time, he became a little annoyed. But at this moment, he really wanted to take the initiative to step forward and kiss Pei Chichi. For those scenes, he hoped the director would make a few NGs so he could kiss her continuously. The director was extremely satisfied with Pei Chichi's performance just now. Beautiful. Truly beautiful. This girl's beauty wasn't delicate, innocent, or cold. Instead, it was the kind where many qualities were mixed together to become one of a kind. While Pei Chichi was touching up her makeup, Wu Haoji walked over and looked at her delicate face. He smiled. "I hope I can kiss you later." "Fake," Pei Chichi replied simply, not wanting to pay attention to him. Wu Haoji licked his lips and had an evil smile on his face. "I promise it will be asterisk, asterisk, asterisk." Pei Chichi was disgusted. Ning Jie glanced at Wu Haoji. Chichi is Mr. Tang's woman. Wu Haoji knew Ning Jie. In the entertainment industry, Ning Jie had quite a bit of influence. But she said, "Mr. Tang? Tang you?" Wu Haoji was shocked. His cousin actually invited her love rival to film a commercial with her? Just how strong was his heart? Ning Jie did not respond. She simply sighed. It seemed she had no choice but to tell Mr. Tang. Otherwise, if something happened, she wouldn't be able to take responsibility. As they walked out, Ning Jie went outside to make a phone call. The director was explaining the scene to the male and female leads when Wu Haoji suddenly said, "In order to make it more realistic, I suggest a real kiss. Of course, I won't stick out my tongue." The director thought about it for a moment and agreed. After all, Pei Chichi and Ji Yi were both very good-looking, and it would be unnatural if they were to fake their positions. If they were a couple, they would definitely attract a lot of fans. This advertisement would also be a great success. This was out of consideration of profits. But the director did not know that this was completely Wu Hao's selfish intention. He just wanted to kiss Pei Chichi 365 degrees. He said that he would not stretch out, and he would not stretch out. Pei Chichi pursed her lips. "I don't want to," Xin Lian reminded her coldly. "Miss Pei, you signed a contract." "I'm sorry, I only signed a contract with King, not with your company." Pei Chichi did not give in. Kissing someone else for real? Did she not want to live anymore? Xin Lian was quite domineering. "Then I'll call Qin Anlin." Chapter 227. As she spoke, a faint voice came from the doorway. "You don't have to call. I'm here." Xin Lian froze for a moment. She saw Qin Anlin standing at the doorway with one hand in his pocket and the other holding an unlit cigarette. He looked deeply at Pei Chichi. "Miss Pei, from now on, you don't need to film this commercial anymore." Pei Chichi was stunned. He pointed at the doorway. "Tang Yu is outside. Explain it to him." With that, he smiled faintly. "I have to thank Miss Pei for helping King generate 180 million in less than a day. Even an A-list actress can't do that. What a South African diamond. You called Tang Yu?" Pei Chichi's voice sounded a little hoarse. Qin Anlin smiled. "I had planned to do that, but someone brought it forward. At first, he had wanted to see her potential after the film was done. But now, Tang Yu had found out in just half a day. 200 million to redeem Pei Chichi's contract." Qin Anlin walked over and took the camera from the cameraman's hands. Then he placed it in Pei Chichi's hands. "This is yours. Explain it well." Qin Amlin even patted her shoulder and whispered in her ear, "When Tang Yu is angry, he won't go easy on him. Have you tried it?" How could Pei Chi not have tried it? She looked at the camera in her hands and gulped. "Hurry up and go," Qin Amlin said sympathetically. Then he looked up at Shen Lian. "I'm sorry. We might have to change the female lead." "Qin Amlin, are you messing with me?" Shen Lian gritted her teeth. Qin Amlin lowered his gaze and smiled lightly. He looked up and said, "Shen Lian, why would I mess with you? You've been playing me all along, haven't you?" Including the day she seduced him in his office. For the sake of Tang Yu, she could sleep with Qin Amlin again and again. Didn't she think she was dirty? Qin Amlin turned around and walked out, passing Pei Chi. When he passed Pei Chi called out to him. He paused, and Pei Chi threw the camera at him. It grazed his forehead and fell to the ground, breaking into pieces. At first, Wu Haoji was a little disappointed, but at this time, no one dared to treat Qin Amlin like that. Who would dare to do that to the CEO of King Entertainment? However, if it was Tang Yu's little pet, it would really dare. Blood seeped out of Qin Amlin's forehead. He reached out to wipe it away and frowned at Pei Chi. "You have such a bad temper." "Yes." Pei Chi looked at him. She was sure that this was a trap he had set up from the beginning. Qin Amlin said in a low voice, "It's not a good habit to fly into a rage out of humiliation." He walked out in a straight line. He had told himself that all women were either a way to vent or a commodity. He didn't want to fall in love with anyone again, including Pei Chi. Pei Chi stood there for a long time before walking towards the door. When she reached the door, Qin Amlin's car drove away. There was also a white Bugatti Veyron at the door. That was Tang Yu's car. The car window was open. Tang Yu sat in the car smoking, one arm resting on the car door. When he saw her come out, he looked at her with a deep gaze, as well as the makeup on her face and the clothes she was wearing. "Get in." When she walked closer, his voice was calm and emotionless. Chapter 228. Tang Yu only glanced at her and started the car. He didn't say anything for a long time, his face tense. Pei Chi was a little scared. She bit her lip and looked at him cautiously. "It's just an advertisement." Tang Yu ignored her. She mustered up her courage and said, "Just 3 days." This time, he finally spoke. The car stopped at a red light. Tang Yu's fingers were on the steering wheel as he looked ahead. His voice was a little hoarse. "Are you going to kiss that gigolo for 3 days?" Pei Chi almost jumped up. "It's not a real kiss." "Really?" He snorted coldly, but didn't say anything. In the entertainment industry, you can't stop kissing just because you say so. But he didn't say anything to Pei Chi. He just sped up and drove straight to Xia City. Tang Yu took off his jacket as soon as he entered. "Go wash your face before you talk to me." Pei Chi glared at him and turned to go to the bathroom. Tang Yu's fingers touched his forehead. How dare she glare at him? Did he spoil her too much? Spoiling her to the point where she dared to be so fierce after doing something wrong. He felt a little hot, so he unbuttoned 2 more buttons. He still felt a little pain in his balls. When Pei Chi came out, her face was already clean. She walked up to him and stood up straight. He grabbed her hand and pulled her forcefully. She was almost kneeling in front of him. She didn't dare to move. She earned money on her own. Why should she be afraid of him? Did he really treat her as Tang Xin and discipline her just because she called him brother a few times? But Pei Chi didn't dare to say this out loud. Tang Yu looked down at her. "Do you know what you did wrong?" "I shouldn't have done the advertisement," she said honestly. Then, she said pitifully, "I'd better finish it. It's 200 million yuan in compensation. I've already paid." Tang Yu's gaze landed on her clothes. It was so glaring. He reached out and tore it. Then his gaze became even more dangerous. "Pei Chi, how dare you put a t-shirt on me?" He wanted to strangle her to death. How old was she? Only 20 years old. He had always treated her like a child, only during the day. Just like that, Pei Chi laid on his lap. That dress slipped down, and her long black hair fell on her thin, snow-white shoulders. Her whole body was tender and indescribably seductive. But his anger only grew bigger. He carried her and laid her down. Then his large palm landed on her mercilessly. Pei Chi let out a sorrowful cry as the second blow landed. Tang Yu, you can't hit me. She was already 20 years old, and he still hit her, but it was too embarrassing and it would hurt a lot. However, no matter how much she cried, he did not let her go. Instead, he hit her again and again. With great force, Pei Chi-Chi's voice was hoarse from crying, but he didn't let her go. In the end, she lay on her stomach and called him a jerk. Tang Yu's eyes were a little red. He looked at the red marks on her tender skin. His Adam's apple kept moving, and his voice was as hoarse as sand. Do you know what you did wrong? Pei Chi-Chi was already weak. She lay there and kept calling him a jerk. Chapter 229. How could Tang Yu not know that? He was both angry and amused at the same time. He grabbed her long hair and forced her to lift her little face. That pretty little face was a mess from all the crying. Her eyes and little nose were red, and she looked indescribably pitiful. His stone-hearted heart finally softened a little, and his big palm that was about to hit her turned into a light pat instead. However, Pei Chi-Chi seemed to have reacted reflexively and moaned again. Tang Yu smiled and lowered his head to the back of her ear. Chi-Chi, does it still hurt? She was afraid of being hit by him, so she closed her eyes and nodded randomly. Tang Yu's palm didn't move away. He patted her again gently. How about this? She had been with him for a long time and knew that he had probably calmed down by now. She boldly hugged his waist with her little hands. It still hurts. He looked at her and cursed her in his heart. Little rascal. She really had him in the palm of her hand. His emotions couldn't escape her. However, compared to punishing her, he preferred to do something else. He reached out to carry her and placed her in his arms. He coaxed her gently. Shall I rub it for you? Before she could say a word, his fingers had gotten their way. Pei Chi-Chi wailed. It's not there. Tang Yu chuckled. Then here? Her voice became deep and long, and her little hands hugged his neck tightly. Tang Yu, I'm scared. He had never been like this before. She was nestled in his arms, and her face was very hot. She didn't know what to do. Tang Yu got up and carried her to the bedroom. After a while, Pei Chi-Chi wrapped herself in a blanket and lay in his arms like a little beast. He patted her body that was still trembling and lowered his head to kiss her. Does it still hurt? She seemed to be shocked and immediately shook her head. It doesn't hurt anymore. He laughed. If it doesn't hurt, then let's do it again? She hugged his neck shamelessly. Tang Yu, it's been a few times already. He sighed in his heart. She was still a child after all. Just now in the living room, she could not take it anymore. In this aspect, although he was indulgent, he had always doted on her. He had never let her try those things, but whenever she felt uncomfortable, he would stop. At this moment, he hugged her and said in a low voice, Don't do this again. She propped herself up in his arms. But I owe you another 200 million. Pay with your body. He smiled and pulled her down. Chi-Chi, if you don't think it's enough, cook for me every day, wash my clothes, or have another child or something. When he said these words, there was not the slightest bit of sensuality, but warmth. It was like a husband saying such words to his little wife. Pei Chi-Chi's heart was a little warm, but also a little scared. Her little hands hugged him especially tightly. Tang Yu, you're going to spoil me rotten? Her heart was filled with hatred. Her eyes were filled with darkness, but behind her, Tang Yu brought with him a bright light. His entire body was warm. She couldn't help but get closer to him. Even though she knew that she was covered in sin, she couldn't help it. Just then, Pei Chi-Chi seemed to have understood something. She used to think that one could only love one person in one's lifetime. Now she knew that wasn't the case. When a person was good enough to cancel out all the other things in your heart, that person would be engraved in your heart. The person in her heart was Tang Yu. Chapter 230. Pei Chi-Chi felt that it had never been so clear and so clear before. Tang Yu laughed. So be it. He looked at her. Chi-Chi, no one will be able to stand you like this. What about you? She lay in his arms. At that moment, it was indescribably wonderful. She had always felt that the heavens were unfair to her. After Pei Mingi passed away, the hatred in her heart had reached its peak. However, Tang Yu was the compensation that the heavens had given her. He was her salvation. Her little hand hung around his neck and placed it on his heart, listening to his heartbeat. In her opinion, Tang Yu was a godlike existence. How could he like her? Tang Yu, why do you like me? She looked up at him, at his handsome face. The corner of his mouth twitched. Pei Chi punched him with her little fist. Don't say that your butt is perky. Tang Yu grabbed her little hand and looked down at her. Then he chuckled. That's the truth. One of the main reasons. He paused for a moment and suddenly coughed lightly. Taking on the attitude of a superior, he said, Pei Chi, have I ever said that I like you? She pressed her little face against his neck and said in a childish voice, That's how you express it. Tang Yu was a little helpless. He patted her little butt and said, You know that, but you still want to shoot the advertisement? Pei Chi sat up. She pulled the blanket over her and leaned against the headboard. She said honestly, I need money. Tang Yu glanced at her and sat up. He stretched his hand to the side and lit a cigarette. He slowly took a few puffs. Pei Chi looked at him pitifully. She owed him another 200 million yuan. Although she was paying with her body wasn't worth that much. After Tang Yu finished his cigarette, he reached out with his long arm and grabbed a small laptop from the side of the bed. He turned it on. Pei Chi craned her neck to look over. He pulled her into his embrace with one hand, his arm wrapped around her, and only his head was exposed. His fingers typed a string of characters on the laptop, and the website of the stock market appeared on the screen. Pei Chi looked at the balance in his account and swallowed hard. There were actually billions of yuan. I played with this 10 years ago. I haven't touched it for years. You can play with it. Tang Yu threw the laptop in her arms and got up to go to the bathroom. Pei Chi bravely grabbed his arm. Tang Yu, I don't know how. Her eyes were especially cute when they were wet. You don't know how? Tang Yu was only wrapped in a towel. He looked at her and said seriously, I'll teach you. Ah, Pei Chi said. He looked at her and said seriously, let's shower together. Was he going to teach her in the bathroom? Pei Chi didn't learn how to trade stocks, but she was unlocked in a few new positions. Tang Yu was a beast. In the past, she didn't want to do it in the bathroom. But now, she called out to her brother and hugged and kissed him for a long time. He didn't let her go either. 2 hours later, Pei Chi came out. Tang Yu carried her to the bathroom. After eating, he brought her into the study to teach. This time, he was really teaching. Mr. Tang was very serious. Pei Chi was a little tired from the torture. Within an hour, her head was like a chick pecking at grains, nodding nonstop. Chapter 2:31. Pei Chi woke up a little. She opened her eyes and looked at Tang Yu. Then she buried herself in his arms and said in a muffled voice, Tang Yu, continue. He smiled and carried her up. Walking along the dimly lit hallway, his voice was as gentle as the night. Chi, go to sleep first. Everything will be fine when you wake up. He carried her to the bed in the bedroom. Her body sank into the soft mattress. Tang Yu sat by the bed and looked at her sleeping face. His slender fingers gently pinched her ear, and he suddenly leaned forward and kissed her. Most of his kisses were filled with lust, but this kiss was filled with pity. Chi, I'll give you freedom. But when you're tired of flying, come back to my side, he murmured against her little mouth. He didn't need a strong woman as his wife. But if Chi was willing, he wouldn't stop her. He knew that she wanted to send Zhou Meilin to prison and develop the Pei Corporation. He could help her, not for justice, but for her. Tang Yu lay beside her and carefully placed her in his arms. She was sleeping soundly, leaning sweetly against his neck. This moment was so moving that Tang Yu almost couldn't bear to sleep. At 10 in the morning, in the office of Xinyuan Entertainment's headquarters, Xin Lian sat opposite Tang Yu. Her expression was a little ugly. Tang Yu, Pei Chi has signed a contract. Tang Yu gestured for Xiao Ran, who had brought in the coffee, to leave first. After the door was closed, he looked at Xin Lian and said, Chi-Chi's contract is with King Entertainment, and I've already paid for the breach of contract. Anlin should have told you. Before Shen Lian could speak, Tang Yu's phone rang. He gestured for her to wait and then picked up the phone. Shen Lian knew that it was Pei Chi calling when she saw his loving expression. What's wrong? Tang Yu's voice was low and hoarse, but the corners of his mouth were slightly moving. It was obvious that he was in a good mood. Pei Chi's voice was very gentle. Tang Yu, do you know? I just looked at the stock that you recommended me to buy. It's rising rapidly today. It's already appreciated by about 2 million. He had sufficient funds, so he chose the right stock. Earning money was as easy as drinking plain water. Tang Yu smiled faintly. Don't move yet. We'll see in 2 days. Pei Chi nodded obediently and heard him say, I have a guest here. I'll hang up first. He put down the phone and looked up at Shen Lian. Tang Yu, she's just a little girl. Is she worth your attention? Shen Lian pursed her lips. Uncle and Annie won't agree to you marrying her. Will they? Actually, she was just asking casually. She didn't think that Tang Yu would marry Pei Chi. Many unmarried men would only play with such a beautiful little girl for a while before getting rid of her. However, it was obvious that she didn't know Tang Yu very well. I don't need to report to anyone about my own matters. Tang Yu looked at her. Also, don't ask her to shoot commercials or anything in the future. She's not suited for the entertainment industry. As Tang Yu said this, he stood up. I still have something to do. If there's nothing else, we'll stop here. He was obviously sending her off. He was also very polite to her and didn't seem to remember their past relationship at all. Shen Lian suddenly grabbed his arm. Tang Yu lowered his head and gently broke free. Chapter 232. She looked at him and said, We are compatible in all aspects. Do you still remember how happy we used to be? Tang Yu's expression was indifferent, and so was his voice. Shen Lian, people will grow up. He was no longer a young man in his 20s. He was no longer young and inexperienced. Looking at Shen Lian, he really didn't have much nostalgia for her. Of course, he didn't have a lot of resentment, even though she had climbed into Qin Anlin's bed. He couldn't say that he didn't care, but when Chi appeared, he didn't have that kind of mood anymore. Nothing was important. Not a single trace was left behind. It had more or less to do with him being a businessman. At this moment, when Shen Lian was begging him so weakly, he didn't think much of it. It was just that he couldn't do what he wanted to do. He paused and looked at her. Shen Lian, actually, you just can't accept the fact that I belong to someone else. Her expression was a little dull, which didn't match her usual image of a strong woman. She just looked at him blankly. Tang Yu, are you saying that I don't love you? Tang Yu smiled faintly and leaned on the side. We're not the same people anymore, Shen Lian. Don't be childish. She was too proud and couldn't tolerate failure. That was why she had slept with Anlin back then, without thinking about the consequences. It was also then that he clearly saw Shen Lian's willfulness. He had broken up with her not only because they couldn't be together, but also because he felt that they were no longer suitable for each other. Tang Yu was an old-fashioned man, and Shen Lian wasn't the woman who was suitable for him. For a long time, he had almost given up. He had almost thought that he would never find someone who was compatible with him physically and mentally. But that night, when he was drunk, Chi bumped into his arms. At that moment, he instinctively hugged her, as though he was hugging one of his ribs. They were so compatible that it was as though she was born to be in his arms. She was young as Shen Lian at that time, but she was so obedient and sensible. No, she was not obedient at all. She only knew how to stay by his side and how to hide the fact that she liked someone else. She was so sensible that it made his heart ache. He clearly knew that she liked Jinrong, but he still tolerated it time and time again. It wasn't that he couldn't tell. Recently, he was slowly engraved in her heart. Tang Yu didn't really believe in being a couple for life. All he knew was that the person he was with right now was Pei Chi. He had fallen in love with her, and he didn't want to let go. Shen Lian took a step back. Tang Yu, I'm not being childish. I really want to be with you. Her expression was extremely bitter. Which part of me is inferior to her? Family background, looks, or figure? She looked at him, her heart full of heartache. It was as if she had returned to 5 years ago, to the day they broke up. But it was different from that day. She was still hysterical, but he had already calmed down. The person standing in front of Shun Lian was no longer the Tang Yu who liked her. He had fallen in love with someone else. I never thought that there would be someone else between us. Shun Lian looked up at Tang Yu. Even when I was with Amlin, I never liked him. Tang Yu smiled faintly. Shun Lian, feelings can't be forced. Chapter 233. Shun Lian looked at him in despair. He helped her up firmly. I'll get someone to send you down. He was about to press the intercom when Shun Lian covered the back of his hand. Then, she stood on her tiptoes and kissed him on the lips. Tang Yu was shocked and angry. He pushed her away forcefully. Shun Lian's back hit the desk and it hurt. But this time, Tang Yu didn't help her up. His expression was cold as he pressed the intercom. Secretary Xiao, send Manager Shen out. Shun Lian stared into his eyes and smiled coldly. Tang Yu, you'll regret this. She turned to leave and bumped into Xiao Ran at the door. Xiao Ran was pushed aside. She was stunned. Shun Lian snorted coldly and left. At this moment, Secretary Xiao missed the adorable Pei Chi-Chi. She was so obedient and adorable. She looked at her president's gloomy face and saw a little bit of female lipstick on his lips. She reminded him in a low voice, "Wipe it off." Tang Yu glanced at her. Xiao Ran knew that she would pretend that she didn't see it. But judging from the current situation, it was the president who had been forcefully kissed. Honestly speaking, Manager Shun was a pretty woman. Moreover, she was his ex-girlfriend. How could the president not be moved? An ex-girlfriend was a scarier creature than a mistress in this world. Xiao Ran left the room. Tang Yu washed his face thoroughly. When Shun Lian kissed him just now, she didn't reject it. She just didn't like it because it wasn't Chi-Chi. He couldn't help but smile at the thought of that person. Just then, the intercom in the office rang. He walked out and answered it. It was his mother, Lin Yun. Lin Yun could tell that he was in a good mood. She smiled lightly. Tang Yu, how long has it been since you came to see me? Tang Yu was startled for a moment. Then, he blushed and coughed lightly. I've been busy lately. I'll go tonight. Lin Yun smiled gently. Don't forget to bring Chi-Chi. Tang Yu nodded. I'll bring her here after work. She'll be here around 7. After hanging up, he immediately made a call to Pei Chi-Chi. Pei Chi-Chi was busy looking at a report, so she was a little impatient. Tang Yu, I'm busy. Although she was impatient, her voice was tender and soft. His heart swayed, and there was also an indescribable softness. Mom asked us to go for dinner. I'll pick you up at 6. He smiled and sat in his office chair, looking very relaxed. Pei Chi-Chi was stunned and immediately understood what he meant. His heart was beating wildly. If there was no accident, this kind of meeting with the parents was for marriage. He had talked about marriage a few times. There were jokes and there were times when he forced her, but this time was different. Chi-Chi. His voice was low. It's just a meal. It won't change anything. Yes, it won't change anything. They will still live together and sleep together. Pei Chi-Chi wanted to say something, but she realized that her throat was blocked. She couldn't say a word. After a long time, she spoke. Her voice was dry and hoarse. Tang Yu, are you sure? Tang Yu knew what she meant. He smiled and said, Chi-Chi, you already knew? His warm voice almost made her want to cry. Tang Yu, don't be so nice to me. It's not worth it. She restrained herself so that she wouldn't cry. Chapter 234. She desperately told herself that she was Zhao Ke's daughter. No, she couldn't marry Tang Yu. However, she had been in the dark and cold for so long that she was numb from the cold. Suddenly, Tang Yu appeared like the sun. He was her driftwood. She was afraid, but she couldn't control herself. She reached out and hugged him. Chi-Chi, you're worth it. You're worth the best of everything. His voice was unbelievably warm. As long as she wanted it, he could give her the whole world. Pei Chi-Chi finally cried. She cried softly like a baby. She had never felt so delicate before, because she had Tang Yu now. Perhaps she had always been a child without a sense of security. Tang Yu didn't coax her. He just listened to her cry patiently. Honestly, he had never seen Pei Chi like this. His heart ached and softened, but he was secretly happy. She was crying for him. Are you touched? He chuckled and teased her. You're touched just like that? If we get married one day, will you be so touched that you cry yourself to death at the wedding? She laughed and cried at the same time. I won't. I'll dirty your gown and ruin it. She said it cleverly. Then, she realized that he seemed to have taken advantage of her. Tang Yu's heart was unbelievably soft. He held the phone and said in a low voice, Chi-Chi, I don't mind. Pei Chi-Chi bit her lip, and her face was a little red. After a long time, she scolded, jerk. She hung up the phone. Tang Yu looked at the phone and laughed for a while. This little jerk didn't know how cute he was. He leaned against the back of the chair, and his whole body sank into the soft back. A wedding between him and Chi-Chi, and then they had a few children. Xiao Luo bowed her head. The first thing Meng Qingqing saw when he entered was Tang Yu's lustful expression. He slowly closed the door. Don't tell me that you've rekindled your feelings for Shun Lian? He had heard from others that Shun Lian had been here before. Now that Tang Yu was acting like this, it was really suspicious. Tang Yu glanced at him. You think too much. Is that so? Do you need a mirror to show you your current appearance? Meng Qingqing chuckled. Has Pei Xiao Qi fallen out of favor? Tang Yu had a doting smile on his face. Nonsense. That smile made Meng Qingqing panic. He looked at Tang Yu and asked, Really? Tang Yu thought for a moment. Qingqing, I'll bring Chi-Chi to see my mother tonight. Ah! Meng Qingqing was stunned. He soon realized that Tang Yu was serious, so serious that he was willing to settle down. Isn't it too soon? He began to stammer and swallow his saliva. There was a cigarette in Tang Yu's slender hand and a lighter. He lit it and took a long drag. Why? Do you want to marry me? Meng Qingqing was a little disgusted. I've never seen such a bad taste in you before. Tang Yu smiled and looked out of the window. Sheng Yuan's building was very tall and was almost a landmark in B City. He had always been high and mighty, but no one knew that he was also lonely. He lowered his eyes and said softly, It's just that no one lit me up in the past. Meng Qingqing went forward and patted his shoulder. I understand now. You've turned your hidden coquettishness into blatant coquettishness. Chapter 235. Tang Yu smiled. Congratulations. Meng Qingqing looked at him. What about Xin Lian? Nothing. It's been so many years. I don't think about it anymore. Tang Yu smiled. This was what Meng Qingqing admired most about Tang Yu. His girl had slept with his best friend, but he could still remain calm. However, he seriously wondered if Tang Yu had ever liked Xin Lian. If he had, it shouldn't have been like this. If the female lead was Pei Chi-Chi, he would have exploded. He wouldn't be able to smile and talk about the past. Qingqing, I used to think that marriage needs to be suitable, especially when it comes to background, Tang Yu said in a low voice. But look, I still can't really like Xin Lian. Meng Qingqing was still disgusted. He sighed and said, Pei Xiao Qi has fed you too much chicken soup. Tang Yu put out the cigarette, and looked at him from the corner of his eye. There was a faint smile on his face. Qingqing, you don't have a girlfriend. You don't understand. Meng Qingqing held his wounded heart and walked out. Men in love were really infuriating. Tang Yu got off work at 5 in the afternoon. When he walked out, he put his jacket on his arm and adjusted his tie with one hand. Xiao Ran and a few secretaries saw him off at the door. After he entered the elevator, the secretary said in a low voice, Secretary Xiao, don't you think the president is different today? Xiao Ran smiled and walked into the office. As he sorted out his things, he asked, What's different? He's especially handsome. The secretary thought hard and said. Everyone agreed with her. Xiao Ran said, When is the president not handsome? The president's looks were more than enough to be a celebrity. The secretary bit her lip. He's especially eye-catching today. He's especially high-spirited. Xiao Ran smiled. I'm probably in a good mood. She knew in her heart that since the president had left so early and had just received a call from the former president's wife, he was probably going to meet the president's parents. Tang Yu went to pick up Pei Chi. He parked the car downstairs at the Pei Group's building and called her. In less than 5 minutes, she came down. Her face was a little red, and it was obvious that she had run over. Tang Yu passed the tissue box to her and couldn't help but rub her little head. "Why did you run so fast?" Pei Chi held her bag in her hands and looked sideways at him. "Tang Yu, do you have time for me to go back and change?" He looked at what she was wearing today. She was wearing a thin gray woolen skirt and a black jacket. It was a little too mature. His slender fingers tapped on the steering wheel. "There's no need to go back. Let's just buy one outside." "No, you will buy a very expensive one again." Her little mouth slightly tilted. That look is particularly cute. She had never been so cute in front of him. Tang Yu was moved. He couldn't help but lean over and kiss her little mouth. His voice was hoarse. "The future Mrs. Tang is learning to save money for me now. Do you want a reward?" Pei Chi was trapped between the back of the chair and his body. He was so close that she had nowhere to run. His hot breath blew on her lips and neck, making her shiver slightly. Tang Yu looked at her long eyelashes trembling and chuckled. "Chi, I feel so proud to see you like this." Pei Chi punched his shoulder a few times with her little fist. "Bad guy?" Chapter 236. Pei Chi looked into his eyes. There was a trace of moisture in her eyes. There was also uneasiness and determination. "Tang Yu." Her voice was soft and pitiful. "I want to be with you." Tang Yu had an indescribable feeling in his heart. It was as if all the unwillingness and loneliness he had felt because of Tang Ziyuan for so many years had been comforted by those few words of hers. "Chi, I know." He hugged her, wishing that he could rub this little thing into his bones and blood so that she couldn't escape. "It'll be too late if we go any slower." She sniffed in his arms and reminded him softly. Tang Yu chuckled. "Chi, are you in a hurry?" She blushed. "I'm not." "Okay, I'm the one who's in a hurry." His voice suddenly became unbelievably gentle. Then, he gently kissed her little mouth and let go of her. Pei Chi stared at him with wide eyes, but Tang Yu had already started the car. She waited for a long time, but he didn't say anything, so she lowered her head childishly. "Forget it if you don't want to say it." "Say what?" His voice was especially magnetic, the kind that made her ears turn red. "Chi, do you want me to say that I can't wait to marry you?" "Huh?" It happened to be a red light, and he looked at her sideways with a faint smile. Pei Chi bit her lips and glared at him. "I'm not, but I do want to marry you," he said half-truthfully, then held her little hand and didn't let go. Shameless. Pei Chi turned her head away uncomfortably. She didn't know how shy and fragile she looked right now. Tang Yu looked at her sideways and didn't say anything, but his expression became gentler. He drove the car into the parking lot of the mall, held Pei Chi's hand, and walked straight to a brand suitable for Pei Chi's age. "Mr. Tang, you're very skilled, huh?" Pei Chi pinched him. He put her in front of him, half-hugged her and chuckled. "Miss Pei, same here. You've become a lot bolder." He brought her in, but as soon as he entered, he saw Pei Huan, Jinrong, and Jinrong's mother. Lin Jinrong's mother wanted her son and daughter-in-law to get along well, so she brought Lin Jinrong to pick out clothes for Pei Huan. Although her son didn't seem to be very willing, she didn't object. But now, Tang Yu actually came with Pei Chi. At that moment, Mama Lin also felt her son's gaze and immediately looked straight at Pei Chi. She sighed in her heart. She had heard from Tang Yu's mother that Tang Yu had the intention to marry Pei Chi. They would be relatives in the future, but Jinrong still couldn't let it go. How could they meet in the future? Moreover, Chi was so beautiful. Tang Yu wouldn't be at ease. Mother Lin thought that if she left after saying goodbye, the scene would be very uncomfortable. But Pei Huan wasn't willing. Who was she? She was the eldest young mistress of the Lin family. What about Pei Chi? She was just a woman by Tang Yu's side that couldn't be seen. Pei Huan sneered. "Pei Chi, when are you willing to be magnanimous and release my mother from the police station? No matter what, she raised you. Aren't you an ingrate if you do this?" Chapter 237. Lin Jinrong put his hands in his pockets with an indifferent expression. Mother Lin sighed in her heart. Pei Chi smiled. Pei Huan, it's not up to me to let Annie go. Annie raised me up, and I always remember it in my heart. I always want to repay her. Is this how you repay her? Pei Huan was a little annoyed and shocked that Pei Chi didn't give her any face in front of Tang Yu. Pei Chi sneered. Annie broke the law unknowingly. This time, she didn't do anything to her because she ran into me. If she accidentally does the same to someone else next time, what do you think will happen? Isn't it a good thing for her to be locked up for a few days to reflect on herself? Besides, didn't Annie teach me this since I was a child? What I remember most is that sentence. Lock her up for a few days, and she'll be obedient. Pei Huan, do you still remember? Pei Huan trembled with anger. Pei Chi, just you wait. A bastard like you won't have a good end. Mother Lin was a little surprised. Although Pei Huan was a little willful, these vulgar words came out so naturally. It seemed that she was usually the same as Zhou Meilin. Pei Chi smiled faintly. No matter how bad she is, she's just like that. She held Tang Yu's hand and walked inside. Pei Huan stamped her feet and shouted, Pei Chi, what do you want? I don't want anything. Pei Chi lowered her head to pick clothes and looked up at Pei Huan. I just want to seek justice for Dad. Pei Huan was stunned. After a long time, she murmured, Dad is already dead. What else do you want? What came into view was Pei Chi's faint smile. From that day on, Pei Chi became Pei Huan's nightmare. Mr. Tang was very calm about his little friend's evil behavior. He already knew that his little girl was a little fierce and not a weak little girl. Mother Lin finally pulled Pei Chi away. Before Lin Jinrong left, he glanced at Pei Chi and quickly left as well. As soon as they left, Pei Chi put down the clothes rack in her hand and looked at Tang Yu. I'm not in the mood anymore. No matter how powerful she was still a little girl. Tang Yu smiled faintly and walked over to pick out a set of clothes for her. Can't hold it in anymore? Pei Chi looked at him and said, No, I just don't want to see her. Because seeing her and Zhou Meilin reminded him of his father. Tang Yu saw a touch of sadness and mania in her eyes. How could he not know how much hatred she had in her heart? Bring me the information about Zhou Meilin's embezzlement. I'll let my lawyer take a look. He patted her. Chi, you can't be too eager for quick success. You'll only hurt yourself. You know? She asked him, somewhat dismayed. Because of Pei Mingyi's death, the evidence became irrelevant, and the only witness, Manager Li, refused to admit that he had conspired with Zhou Meilin. It was not easy to sue Zhou Meilin. It was almost hopeless. Tang Yu nodded and took her to the locker room. The most important thing now is to manage the Pei Corporation well. As for other things, there's plenty of time. Pei Chi looked up at him and pursed her lips. Mr. Tang, you've comforted me. He chuckled and pinched her little face. You're a little girl, but you have to be so fierce. Actually, you appreciate it, don't you? She was in a much better mood and even a little naughty. Chapter 238. Pei Chi came out of the changing room. She was wearing a white dress with a beige jacket on the outside. Her long hair was tied into a ponytail, making her look young and pure. Tang Yu shook his head as he swiped his card. Chi, you're making me feel like an uncle. You're an uncle. Her hand was naturally holding his as she tilted her head and smiled at him. The cashier was conquered by the smile on Tang Yu's face and almost typed the wrong amount. Tang Yu patted Pei Chi and walked out with her. Outside, he saw Lin Jinrong leaning against his sports car, smoking. Tang Yu frowned. Jinrong, Lin Jinrong sneered. I should be congratulating you. He looked at Pei Chi. This is the life you want, isn't it? Jinrong, that's enough. Tang Yu's expression was a little gloomy. Don't forget you're married. Lin Jinrong chuckled. Brother Tang Yu, aren't you going to marry her soon? Can't you let me confess before you marry her? He looked straight at Pei Chi and chuckled. Pei Chi, do you still like me? Pei Chi felt that her eyes were dry and stinging, and she was also feeling a little pain. She couldn't say it out loud. At that moment, she was also embarrassed. She shook her head and turned her face to the side. Lin Jinrong smiled. I know. He lowered his head and stepped on the cigarette but on the floor. After a long silence, he said, Brother Tang Yu, treat her well. With that said, he opened the car door and got into the car. The car sped up almost instantly. At that moment, the white moon in his heart died. He really couldn't see that hint of love in Pei Chi-Chi's eyes anymore. Why did she keep asking her? It was probably because she couldn't take it lying down. Just like what Pei Huan had said, their 2 years could not compare to Tang Yu's 2 months. Let's go. Tang Yu hugged Pei Chi-Chi. I'll talk to him. Pei Chi-Chi did not say anything. Her mood was obviously affected. When you were dealing with Pei Huan just now, wasn't my little friend quite fierce? It's gone now? He lifted her chin and scrutinized her eyes. Pei Chi-Chi, you better not let me see you cry. He paused for a moment. Mr. Tang is very jealous. She could not help but smile as she tilted her head to look at his handsome side profile. When his car stopped in Shui Yunfu's courtyard, Tang Yu unbuckled his seatbelt and coughed lightly. Chi-Chi, are you going to keep looking at me like this? She blushed, unbuckled her seatbelt, and picked up the gift box in the back of the car. It was actually a handicraft prepared by Tang Yu. Pei Chi-Chi blushed as she held it. Lin Yun was especially gentle. Because they had met a few times before, she was not unfamiliar with Pei Chi-Chi at all. However, this made Pei Chi-Chi even more helpless. Tang Yu, don't bully her. Chi-Chi is still young. Lin Yun made the meal herself and served it with Annie Fu. Pei Chi-Chi quickly went up to help. Lin Yun was comforted. She was so good-looking and young. She heard that she was good at housework. Tang Yu had never liked to live with a group of servants, so a capable wife was perfect for him. Tang Yu did not bully me, Pei Chi-Chi said softly under Tang Yu's threat. Then, she stole a glance at Tang Yu. Chapter 239. Lin Yun patted the back of Pei Chi-Chi's hand. Don't be afraid of him. Tang Yu isn't that powerful. Hearing that, when you raised an eyebrow and asked Pei Chi-Chi, am I not powerful? Pei Chi-Chi's face turned slightly red. Tang Yu's heart softened, and he looked at her with an unbelievably gentle gaze. Lin Yun looked at her son's affectionate eyes and sighed inwardly. He had fallen too deep. She was also a little surprised. Tang Yu wasn't a sentimental person. Why did he suddenly care so much? And it seemed like he was going to book it. Lin Yun gave Pei Chi-Chi a green bracelet. Pei Chi-Chi looked at the green bracelet and didn't dare to accept it. Take it. Mom is giving it to you. Tang Yu smiled and reached out to accept it for her. He didn't let her wear it, mainly because it wasn't convenient for her to wear it. He looked at his mother and wanted to say something, so he sent Pei Chi-Chi away after the meal and patted her little butt. Go upstairs and tidy up my room. We'll sleep here tonight. Although she had lived with him for a long time, Pei Chi-Chi still felt a little uncomfortable. Hurry up. He handed the box with the jade to her. I'll check it later. Pei Chi-Chi nodded and went upstairs obediently. Tang Yu didn't turn to look at his mother until he couldn't see her anymore. He smiled helplessly. Still too young. Not obedient. Lin Yun didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Tang Yu, do you treat Chi-Chi as a girlfriend or a daughter? Tang Yu actually answered seriously. Sometimes she's a girlfriend, and sometimes she's like a daughter. He remembered the last time she secretly smoked and he hit her. He couldn't help but feel his heart skip a beat. Lin Yun looked at him and couldn't help but guess that he was thinking about something inappropriate. It seems that you still inherited some of Tang Ziyuan's traits. Lin Yun looked at him. Tang Yu smiled and said, Mom, why did you mention him? Aren't all men like this? However, he was only willing to do these indecent things to Pei Chi-Chi now and in the future. Lin Yun sighed. I called you here today because I have something to tell you. If you're sure that it's Chi-Chi, bring Chi-Chi along for your father's birthday in a few days. She was considered to be famous. Lin Yun was very open-minded. She hated Tang Ziyuan, but she didn't say anything in front of Tang Yu. If Sheng Yuan wanted to go further, he couldn't have any scandals. Moreover, no matter how much she hated Tang Ziyuan, she always cared about Tang Yu. Tang Yu smiled. He did not say yes, nor did he say no. He just stood behind Lin Yun and put his hands on her shoulders. He bent down slightly and moved closer to his mother's ear. "Mom, Uncle Zhao has been waiting for you for many years." Zhao, he was a veteran of Sheng Yuan. He was in his 50s and took good care of himself. His temperate lifestyle made him look very good. He had been with Lin Yun for many years. He had been single all these years, but Lin Yun didn't say anything about it more than 10 years ago. Tang Ziyuan didn't know about this. If he knew, Sheng Yuan probably wouldn't be so calm. This was the thing about men. If their ex-wife was with another man, they would always feel uncomfortable. Lin Yun patted the back of Tang Yu's hand. "I'm already so old." She turned her head and smiled. "Mom is very satisfied with my current life." Chapter 240. Lin Yun held his hand and looked out at the dark night. She sighed softly. So many years have passed in the blink of an eye. All that hatred and love had left her. All she wanted was for Tang Yu to live a good life. That was all she wanted. Tang Yu held his mother from behind. Although his mother was almost 50 years old, she was still very beautiful. Time had treated her well. All these years, the quiet life had made her mature. Zhao couldn't compare to her. Tang Yu could also see that Tang Ziyuan still had some reluctance to part with his mother. But this reluctance was very limited, and it wasn't what his mother needed. "All right, let's go upstairs and see Chi-Chi." Lin Yun patted him and said gently, "Treat her well in the future." Tang Yu laughed in a low voice. Lin Yun suddenly thought of something. But her background is a little complicated. Tang Yu, now her maternal family, the Lin family, had become a topic of discussion in the upper class. It was mainly because of Jean Rong's mother-in-law, who was rumored to have found a gigolo and had personally angered her husband to death. So Jean Rong's mother didn't go out much recently, and she would sigh when she saw her. Tang Yu smiled lightly. "I know. Mom, I'll take care of it." Zhou Meilin was still in the detention center and would probably be released in a few days. Lin Yun sighed softly. She also knew that this matter would be difficult to handle. If Jean Rong wasn't involved, it would be easy. Tang Yu patted her shoulder and accompanied her to watch the moon for a while. When the night was as cold as water, he went upstairs. Pushing the door open, his little friend was sitting on the floor with her back against the bed, holding a photo album in her hands and looking at it. Her long hair was down, and her coat was thrown on the bed. Her little face looked very quiet. Tang Yu looked at her for a while, then reached out and snatched the photo album from her hands. "What are you looking at?" Pei Chi-Chi looked up with a smile on her little face. "I'm looking at you." He gently flicked her little head, and then sat face to face with her. "What's so good about the photo album? Just look at me." He asked her to look very seriously and very close. Pei Chi-Chi blushed. "I didn't say I wanted to see you." He pulled her into his arms. "Do you want to kiss me?" Hugging her, he placed one hand on the back of her head. With a smile, he kissed her deeply on the lips once, then once again. Pei Chi-Chi bit her lips and refused to let him kiss her. Tang Yu smiled, carried her up, and threw her onto the bed. Her body sank into the soft bed, and her black hair spread all over the pillow. His large palms pressed against her sides, pressing into her hair. Tang Yu, the little pitiful child's eyes were misty, and he looked very pitiful. His little hand pressed against his chest. "Your mom will hear," because he was using all his strength to support himself. His muscles were bulging, especially when a few buttons on his shirt were unbuttoned. She could see some. Hearing this, Tang Yu bent down slightly and moved close to her ear. His voice was very low and husky. "Hear what?" Pei Chi-Chi's little face turned even redder. Her little hands hugged him, and she didn't let him move. "You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.